There's a date that the entire world celebrates every year. Millions of people gather, light candles, sing, weep, remember. They call it Easter. But what almost no one knows, what the history books don't mention, what Rome did everything possible to erase, is that the Easter you know is not the Easter that existed. The original was something completely different. And when you discover what it was and why it was changed, you will never see this date the same way again. Subscribe right now and hit the bell. Every week, we bring stories like this one. The ones power buried, the ones time forgot, the ones no one dares to tell in full. Don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the most important part of this video. To understand the secret, you have to go back 2,000 years, not to the Jerusalem that appears in movies, with its clean streets and white robes. Go back to the real Jerusalem, an occupied city, a city living in fear, a city where the Roman Empire had soldiers on every corner, where taxes crushed the people, where speaking too loudly could cost you your life. That is the context. That is the stage where everything happened. And in that setting, once a year, something occurred that made Rome more nervous than anything else. More than rebellions, more than prophets, more than the zealots with their daggers hidden beneath their cloaks. What made Rome nervous was the Jewish Passover, the Passover, the feast of a people commemorating their liberation from Egyptian slavery. A feast where hundreds of thousands of pilgrims arrived in Jerusalem from every corner of the known world. A feast whose central theme, the heart of every ritual, was this: an oppressed people was freed from an empire. A people in slavery rose up and walked out free. Can you imagine what that meant for the Romans standing there with their swords, collecting taxes from that very same people? The Jewish Passover was not just a religious celebration. It was in every song, in every cup of wine, in every piece of unleavened bread, a political reminder that empires fall, that oppression ends, that there's a force greater than Caesar's. That is why Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, traveled personally from Caesarea Maritima to Jerusalem every year during Passover. It was not a courtesy visit. It was a control operation. The Roman records that have survived, and the documents of historian Flavius Josephus, describe this period as the most volatile time on the Jewish calendar. Pilate arrived with additional troops. He reinforced the walls. He stationed archers on the rooftops of the temple. The atmosphere was a pressure cooker with the fire already burning. And it was exactly in that context, in that week charged with political, religious, and social tension, that the trial and crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth took place. But this is where the secret Rome buried begins, because what the Gospels record, and what modern historians have confirmed through external documents, is that the legal process that ended with Jesus on a cross was, from the Roman legal standpoint, completely irregular. It violated the protocols of Roman law in at least 3 fundamental points. And that is not a religious opinion. It is a legal conclusion. The first, Roman capital trials could not be held at night or during festivals. Jesus was arrested on Thursday night. The trial before the Sanhedrin occurred before dawn. The transfer to Pilate occurred at daybreak on Friday. All of it in less than 6 hours. All of it on the very eve of Passover. Under Roman law, that process had no validity. Pilate knew it, and yet he signed it. The second, the accused had the right to a defense. In the Roman tradition, even slaves had the right to present witnesses. The gospel record, corroborated by analysis of Roman legal proceedings of that era, shows a trial with no real defense, no formal witnesses for the defense, no minimum time established by law to prepare a response. It was a judicial farce disguised as a legal process. The third, and this is the one Rome had the most reason to conceal, Pilate found no sufficient cause for the death penalty. The very text of the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 23, records that Pilate said on 3 separate occasions that he found no guilt in the accused. 3 times, the governor of the Roman Empire in Judea declared innocent the man he was about to order crucified, and he crucified him anyway. Why? What had such power over Pilate that it forced him to condemn a man he himself considered innocent? The answer lies in one phrase, a single phrase that the Gospel of John records in chapter 19, verse 12. When Pilate was trying to release Jesus, the crowd shouted at him, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar." Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. That phrase was a direct political threat, and Pilate understood it perfectly. In the year 30 AD, the Emperor Tiberius was a paranoid old man, retired to the island of Capri, governing through fear. His Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, had been executed just a few years earlier for conspiring against him. The atmosphere in Rome was one of total suspicion. Any provincial governor denounced for tolerating someone who proclaimed himself king, even in the most remote corner of the empire, could lose his position, could lose his life. Pilate was trapped, and he chose his own survival, washing his hands before the crowd. The gesture described by the Gospels and debated by historians for centuries was not a gesture of personal innocence. It was a gesture of political communication. Pilate was saying to the Roman world watching him, "This was not my decision. It was not Rome who killed this man. It was the people." And at the same time, he was telling the Jewish crowd, "Carry what comes next yourselves." It was a man washing his hands of a lie he himself had signed. But the deepest secret is not in the trial. It is in what came after, in what Rome did during the following 3 centuries, with the memory of all of this. Because in the year 313 AD, Emperor Constantine signed the Edict of Milan, and Christianity went from being a persecuted religion to being the religion of the empire. And at that moment of transition, Rome needed something very specific. It needed the new official narrative to not have Rome as the villain. It needed the guilt for Christ's death to fall somewhere else, on another people, on another story. And that is when the longest rewriting operation in Western history began. The documents that recorded the irregularities of the Roman trial were ignored in official sermons. The legal responsibility of Pilate, which was total from the standpoint of Roman law, because he was the one with the authority of life and death in Judea, was minimized. Pilate was increasingly portrayed as a weak man, manipulated, almost a victim of circumstances. The Coptic Church of Ethiopia even canonized him as a saint. That is not an exaggeration. That is history. And Easter itself was subjected to a radical transformation. The first great controversy occurred in the 2nd century. It was called the Quartodeciman Controversy, and it was an enormous fight within the early Christian communities over when Christian Easter should be celebrated. The communities of Asia Minor, who maintained a direct connection with the original disciples, celebrated Easter on the 14th of Nisan, the same date as the Jewish Passover, regardless of what day of the week it fell on, following exactly what they understood to be the tradition of Jesus and his apostles. But Rome wanted a different date. Rome wanted Sunday. Rome wanted to disconnect Christian Easter from Jewish Passover, to separate the roots, to create distance, and Rome had the power to impose its will. In the year 325, the Council of Nicaea, convened by Constantine himself, resolved the controversy officially. Christian Easter would be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon, following the spring equinox, an astronomical formula that guaranteed the date would never coincide exactly with the Jewish Passach. Never again. By design, Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea, Constantine's official chronicler, wrote about this decision with a clarity that today is deeply troubling. He said, in essence, that it was inappropriate for Christians to celebrate the same Passover as those who had stained their hands with the most heinous crime. Those were his words. The official chronicler of the first Christian emperor described the separation of Easter as a deliberate decision of differentiation, not theological, political, and there lies the secret Rome buried for 2,000 years. It is not that Easter is false. It is not that the story of the crucifixion is an invention. It is that the version that reached us was carefully edited by the very power that had signed the death sentence. Rome did not only kill Jesus, Rome also controlled for centuries the narrative of how it killed him. And when the empire converted to Christianity, it simply changed its tool. Instead of persecuting the story, it absorbed it. It edited it from the inside. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 in the caves of Qumran, contributed something that theologians are still processing. Evidence that there were first-century Jewish communities that followed a different calendar from the official calendar of the temple in Jerusalem. That means there's a real possibility, seriously debated among historians, that the Last Supper and the crucifixion occurred on different dates from those established by official tradition. That Jesus and his disciples celebrated Passach according to an alternative calendar. the Essene calendar, while the rest of Jerusalem celebrated it days later, which would explain something that always seemed like a contradiction in the Gospels. How could there be a trial and an execution on the very eve of Passover, when Jewish law expressly forbade it? The answer may be that it was not the eve of the official Passover. It was the Passover of another calendar, a Passover within a Passover, a secret within a secret. 2,000 years later, millions of people light candles, gather with family, search for colored eggs, eat in silence or sing with joy, each with their own tradition, each with their own faith. And all of that is real, and all of that has value. But beneath every celebration, beneath every ritual that today seems eternal and unchanging, there's an older story, a more complicated story, a story that an empire tried to bury and that the earth, little by little, in the form of old parchments, forgotten documents, letters too small and manuscripts too ancient, has been giving back. The Easter no one knows is not an Easter without faith. It is an Easter with memory, and memory, when it is complete, is always more powerful than forgetting.